Professor Maria de Fátima Ferreiro, Professor Paulo Tormenta Pinto, Professor Ana Vaz Pinheiro, Filipa Fiuza, members of the scientific and organizing committees, keynote speakers, Congress participants and attendees. On behalf of the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation, I welcome you all to this Congress. Science and education are, as most of you know, two of the statutory aims that this foundation has pursued since its creation in 1956. On the other hand, scientific research projects, such as the project ARC-WAR, associated with this Congress, are for us excellent opportunities to promote the use and dissemination of the documentary resources kept by the Gulbenkian Art Library and Archives, as well as to foster scientific knowledge about our institutional past. For all these reasons, we are very pleased to host this Congress today. I wish you all happy encounters and stimulating discussions. Anna, thank you.
Okay, so welcome all. Thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure and an honor once more to have this second edition of our Congress, International Congress, Colonial and Postcolonial Studies. I would like to start, of course, thank you to the Calouste Gulbenkian Foundation and João Vieira, who spoke before me, and also to thank everybody who was engaged in the organization of this conference, but mostly to ISCTE, not only to Paulo Tormenta Pinto, which is the director of our research center. So Paulo, thank you very much for joining us today, and also to Professor Fátima Ferreira, which is representing our dean in ISCTE. So I would like to say a few words before asking Paulo to be here and to talk a little in behalf of our research center, DINÂMIA'CET, in ISCTE. So for me, I'm really emotional today for being here once more. It's, as I said, the second time that we are able to hold this conference in this place, in this very, very beautiful building in Lisbon. And today, what brings us, for the next 2 days, it's this idea of debating the relation between war and architecture. This is, as most of you know, or some of you know, this is organized in the scope of a research project that it's an ongoing research project. So the researchers will talk a little tomorrow and in the next days in the mornings, trying to explain what we have done until now, related to try to understand the connection between architecture and the colonial war in three former Portuguese colonized territories in Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and Mozambique. So it's our specific work, our specific research. We will talk a little about that tomorrow. But the idea of this conference was, to launch this challenge to everybody to participate with their knowledge and with the researchers that have been done and also been doing now related to this idea how war can impact in architecture programs. We are studying a specific program, which is housing, but I'm sure there are other programs also very, very important to understand a little more how it was our colonial past. So it's really an honor to have you here. among us, debating these issues. We really feel it's a pleasure to have you here also with us, sharing with us all your knowledge, all your research, and I would like to make some special thanks. I know that we are starting, but it's in a way also to present what is going to happen tomorrow. I would like to thank Samia Hani, which is an expert related to how war and colonial architecture can be explained. Unfortunately, Samia would not be here in presence with us, but she will be able to give us the conference by online, or whatever it is, because she's here. So, but she will manage to be with us. And then also we will have Johan Lage and Peter Schrijver, which are old friends of us. We really count on their wisdom and their knowledge to help us and continue to guide us in research. So thank you very much, Peter and Johan, for accepting being with us, not only share as a keynote speaker, but also as a friend and also as a colleagues. So and then we have all our team is very vast. We have people coming from Angola, people coming from Mozambique, people coming from Guinea. Without the people, these researchers, it would be completely impossible to do on-site fieldwork, for instance, to be able to consult the archives, especially the African archives. So we are very thankful to have, be able to get all this team, with us. We started this adventure of studying this kind of all these topics almost 12 years now. Philippa, which is my co-IR in this adventure, she's with me more than 10 years, working in doing the same research. Well, more or less, but in the same, dealing with the same topics. And of course, my last words are to Philippa, because she has been really, I cannot explain how a friend she has been to me, and also a colleague, and I really rely on her work and her wisdom also. And of course, there are other partners. Tomorrow I will explain a little more, but the Overseas Historical Archives with Dr. Ana Canas, which is also part of our project since the beginning. Now we have a new partner, which is the Military Historical Archive, which is, of course, dealing with war. It's important to go to the military archives to understand also how the military deal with the effort of infrastructure in these territories. And also we rely on our colleagues now in institutions, African institutions like Universidade Eduardo Mondlane in Mozambique, and IPGUL in Angola, and many others. So thank you once more for being here, for accepting the challenge of sharing your knowledge with us. I hope the Congress will really fulfill your expectations, and tomorrow I hope we'll really start this work with all these sessions and so on. Now I will call Paulo Tormenta Pinto, and please don't forget that today we will have the opening session with the architects. We always invite architects to open our Congress in order not to keep, what is really important, which is we were trained as architects, so for us, architecture, being able to dialogue with our colleagues architects, it's very important. So we will have the architect Alessandro Petti. He will open in a more formal way, a little more formal way, this Congress. But now I will ask Paulo Tormenta Pinto to give some words on behalf of DINÂMIA'CET. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. First of all, I would like to compliment Dr. João Vieira, the director of the library and archives of this prestigious institution, Gulbenkian. And also I'd like to compliment also the Maria de Fátima Ferreira in representation of the rector, actually vice rector of ISCTE, here in the session. And I would like to compliment and to salute very much Ana Vaz Milheiro for this organization. Actually, this Congress and this research started in 2010, and since that time until today, it's been a huge work about this issue, about trying to understand the impact of architecture in the former Portuguese colonies. For us, for myself, I'm the director of the research unit that hosts this project, this research project that is on the base of this Congress. I would like to mention that for us, we are divided in three research groups: innovation and labor, governance, economy, synthesis, and also cities and territory. And this Congress and this research is hosting our group of cities and territories. So for us, in DINÂMIA'CET, research unit that study the socio-economical change and the territory, it's for us very important to host this project and this Congress, because it's an opportunity to reflect about the impact of the post-colonial landscape, not only in the territory but also in the society. So today we are discussing a lot about this issue in the society in general, but having this perspective about architecture, about the landscape, it's for us very important because architecture allowed us to understand the mediation between the society, the policies, and the territory. So it's very important to have this kind of vision, this kind of sight to understand the impacts of the post-colonial effects. In this conference, the issue of housing will be also a very important theme. And it's important also to understand not only in the field of the post-colonial landscape, but also to understand the impact of this kind of issue in our society, in our contemporary society, and particularly the effects that we are living now here in our nation, in Portugal today. And this relationship, it's between our past and our present. It's very important to understand all those issues. Because all of this, I think that the Congress will be a success, such as the first one that we organized also here in Gulbenkian, and I expect that everyone enjoy these 3 days, particularly today. We have this initial conference, and I think that will be great for everyone, and thank you very much for coming, and I wish a very good moment for all the organization. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Rector of ISCTE, Professora Maria de Lourdes Rodrigues, I want to thank you for the invitation to be here, and also thank you, Fundação Calouste Gulbenkian, Dr. João Vieira, for hosting this interesting conference. And I want also congratulate Professora Ana Vaz Milheiro for the project and for the organization of this conference. The conference and the research is integrated in one of our 8 unit research. And DINÂMIA, I think it is a very good example. And I think some of the things that were said by my colleagues, it is a good example of something that is characteristic of ISCTE, which is interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and also interdisciplinarity. I think that in this conference, it is an example of this, by mixing architecture and history, so human sciences and maybe social sciences. So I want to thank you and to wish you all a good and productive work during these 3 days. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we will start now with our first keynote speaker, and I will ask Francesca Vita to present our keynote speaker. Since it was Francesca who introduced us for the first time, so I asked Francesca who could we invite for be here as an architect in the field, you know, who could understand our issues, our topics, the impact of war, and Francesca suggested Alessandro Petti, and so I asked Francesca to introduce him. So Francesca, please.
So good evening to everyone. I wasn't expecting this surprise from Hannah, but I'm very, very pleased to introduce Alessandro Petti and Sandy Lal, that she couldn't be here with us today. I will do the formal presentation and then maybe a more informal one. So, sorry. The artistic practice of DAAR, Decolonizing Architecture and Art Research, which was founded by Sandy Lal and Alessandro Petti, is situated between architecture, art, pedagogy, and politics. Over the last 2 decades, they have developed a series of research projects that are both theoretically ambitious and practically engaged in the struggle for justice and equality. In their artistic research practice, art exhibitions are both sites of display and sites of action that spill over into other contexts. Built architectural structures, the shaping of critical learning environments, intervention that challenge dominant collective narratives, the production of new political imaginations, the formation of civic spaces, and the redefinition of concepts. Alessandro Petti is Professor of Architecture and Social Justice at the Royal Institute of Art in Stockholm. So maybe after this presentation, my informal presentation will be, I don't know, it will make justice to our keynote speaker. I met Alessandro a couple of years ago. A common friend of us invited me to participate to the summer school that Alessandro, Sandy, Emilio, and a group of people organized in Sicily in order to address a difficult heritage. For me, it was a very marking experience. I was in my path of writing the PhD, and it was interesting the way they address architecture from many point of views and addressing to the architectural world and environment from political, social, environmentalistics, and others points of view. So it was a great experience. It marked me a lot, and from that experience, I started to think how we can address architectural world, architectural research, and we really need to decolonize our research field and the themes himself. So I would like to welcome Alessandro to come on stage, and the stage is yours.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for this very nice and generous introduction. I would like, of course, first of all, to thank Francesca and Beatrice for their warm invitations. I'm very happy, actually, to be here today. And I'm also very much looking forward to learn more from the presentation and discussion in the next 2 days. Unfortunately, as Francesca already mentioned, my partner Sendilal could not be here today due to the previous teaching commitments. However, I also feel tonight in very good company with many friends that are participating to the symposium. Among them, of course, Emilio Distretti, with whom I had the pleasure to collaborate through writing, thinking, and teaching together. Tonight also here is Hossam Abu Saleh, with whom I designed several of the art installations that you might also see tonight. Anna Naomi de Souza, that was courageous enough to join us and film our study trips in Asmara, Addis, and also in Sicily. I'm not sure I have enough time to show maybe a very short video that she made, but let's see how it goes. I also would like that maybe tonight I'm trying to be very much concise and brief, and because I really hope that despite maybe being a keynote lecture, I'm always interested in conversations. I'm always interested in maybe putting forward what we try to do as a sort of pretext to start the conversation. So I really hope that, as I said, I'm trying to be as brief as possible, at least that we have a few minutes for questions. Towards an entity of decolonization emerge in direct opposition to the so-called entity of colonization of Sicilian latifundium. In Italian is ente di colonizzazione del latifondo siciliano, which was established in Italy fascist regime in 1940, following the model of the entity of colonization of Libya and colonial architecture in Eritrea and Ethiopia. These territories were considered by the regime empty, underdeveloped, and backwards, and therefore in need of being reclaimed, modernized, and repopulated. This collective research project emerged from the necessity to challenge fascist, colonial, and modernist mythologies still present today in public discourses, spaces, and institutions. In particular, at this time, with the emergence of fascist ideologies in Europe, it became urgent to ask, what kind of heritage is the fascist colonial heritage? How do the material traces of colonial and fascist architecture today acquire different meanings in the context of migration from the ex-colonies? And more importantly, who has the right to reuse it? Should in fact this heritage be demolished or reoriented towards other aims? Despite the fall of fascism following the Second World War, Italy's defascistization remains, unfortunately, an unfinished process, which can be seen visible, of course, in architectures, monuments, flags, and toponymy that celebrates the fascist regime. Furthermore, Italy, having lost its colonies during the Second World War, never embarked on a real process of decolonization. Towards an entity of decolonization is part of a large collective research program that studies and proposes the reuse of colonial, fascist, and modernist architectures for aims different from what they were designed for. The research can take the form of art installations, public gatherings, pedagogical programs, and theoretical speculations. Once primarily located outside of Europe, the struggle of decolonization has today another front within its borders and peripheries. What the media continue to call the refugee crisis, the environmental crisis, or the political crisis, in reality we do know that is the incapacity of Europe to come to terms with 500 years of colonialism, extractions, and exploitations. It's not possible today to understand displacement of people, environmental catastrophe, or contemporary fascism without and throughout the knowledge of European colonial heritage. But before I continue, I need, or I would like to clarify, or make simply more explicit, my own personal position. By clarifying the perspective and the specific point of view from which I see and speak, and my belonging to a specific cultural geography and local history, not universal history, I hope to take a distance from the pretentious, universalistic, and disembodied European modernist male subject, and at the same time to build genuine alliances. The research program emerged after more than a decade of working in Palestine, where decolonizations mean essentially the practice of opposing Israel's regime of occupation, colonization, and apartheid. Moving back to Europe via Palestine, I started to understand the Italian southern questions, where I was born, more clearly as a case of internal colonization. Needless to say that this connection is not new. In writing The Question of Palestine, Edward Said was influenced by Antonio Gramsci's conceptual categories of subalternity and hegemony developed in relation precisely to the so-called Italian Southern question. He clearly linked imperial European ambitions to the necessity to cement an abstract notion of nation-state, which is still haunting us today. After living and working in Palestine for over a decade, and from where I was obliged to live in 2017, I find myself back again in one of the periphery of Europe, this time in Stockholm, where the question, what does it mean to decolonize, of course, has changed. Teaching now in European university, the front line of my struggle is knowledge production, and more specifically, undermining the mythologies built around Western modernity as its messianic message of salvation. The European colonial model project of exploitation, segregation, and dispossession has divided the world in different races and nations, constructing its identity in opposition to other projects that were labeled by modernity as traditional and backward. The suppression of alternative was and is, in fact, an attempt to create a singular modernist colonial epistemology. Therefore, modernity cannot exist without the disqualification and degradation of other approaches and worldviews. In 2017, the nomination of Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, as UNESCO World Heritage Site for its modernist colonial architecture built by the fascist regime during the period of the Italian colonization, posed a series of fundamental questions for both the ex-colonized and the ex-colonizer. Who has the right to preserve, reuse, and re-narrate fascist, colonial, and modernist architecture? While architectural modernism, in particular, continues to be celebrated for its progressive and political agenda, what the modernist rhetoric of progress and innovation obscures is its dark side, namely its inherent homogenization, authoritarian, and segregational dimensions. These modernist conceptions are still present in contemporary architecture and urban planning, where in the name of modern architecture, entire communities, form of living, and historical sites are erased. While a critique of modernism alone is not enough, having already been conducted by postmodernism, the task of the present is additionally to imagine architectural form of demodernization. Through art exhibitions, the creation of educational environments, architectural interventions, and text, written in conversation with Emilio Di Stretti, Maya Aldabach, Charles Esche, Zoe Watt, and Walter Mignolo, we have started to reflect on forms of architectural demodernization. Demodernization, for us, does not relate to anti-modernism, such the one expressed by reactionary, anti-technological, nationalist, and fascist melancholies. Demodernization indeed does not mean opposing the use of electricity and wiring, mortar and beams, or technology and infrastructure, nor the welfare they can provide, channel, and distribute. Instead, demodernization means profaning the separations, disconnections, and isolations embodied by architectural modernism. By opposing modernist aggressive universalism, demodernization is a method of desegregation that apply as both discourse and praxis to invent form of reappropriation and reuse of modern architecture. I have a problem. Suddenly, my presentation is cut. I don't know how that happened. There were more pictures. Maybe someone needs to help me. Osam, do you want to help me? What? I don't know. Sorry for that. But we actually tested for...
Yeah, so many times.
You want to check if what happened?
Yeah, it's the one we have here is half.
Was some sort of sabotage or?
Yeah, it's pretty much actually. Someone removed and we.
Maybe we got it back.
Came back.
Okay.
Oy, oy, oy.
Good. So we can start
Okay.
from. I don't know how you did it, but thank you.
Power of Control Z.
Okay. Excellent.
Where do you want to start?
I hope that there will be so many other things that you can do. Control Z and undo things. No. That could be so powerful to be used. Yeah, this was in fact a sign of interruptions. Maybe I just made it up because I saw that you were distracted. One possible origin of this more collective project could be traced back in 2008 when we found at the National Archive in Rome a book that was called Entity of Colonization of Libya. Ente di Decolonizzazione della Libia. Until that moment, I was completely unaware that the fascist regime established a series of agencies, each with its respective building, was called Entity of Colonization, in which architecture explicitly was used as a tool of colonization. In it, architectural drawings, statistical data, maps, and images were assembled in a form of a manual to specifically colonize the countryside considered underdeveloped, unproductive, and uninhabited. For the fascist regime, the presumed Libyan desert was similar to the Sicilian countryside, both unproductive and in need of modernization. Description of colonized subjects, including southern Italians as backward, underdeveloped, uncivilized, lazy, and slow in catching up with modernity, characterized the ideological justification for legitimizing the invasion and occupation of Libya, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Paradoxically, the Italian-centered colonialism was justified by the need to find the land and work for poor southern Italian. During the period of its fascist regime, Italy employed modern architecture to implement imperial ambition in Libya. A series of rural villages made of white modernist architecture were erected along the Libyan coast, connected with the web of infrastructure. The fascist government assigned expropriated land to Italian settlers to build, in some occasions, also what they call Muslim villages. Young Italian modernist architects found in this fascist ideological vision of Libya as a desert to be modernized the perfect fictional rhetoric to realize while modernist architecture. Photographic campaigns of talented photographers were always accompanying the inauguration of these villages, feeding the fascist propaganda of modernization and civilization via colonization. In reality, those modernist dreams were hiding were the massacres and the expulsions of the local population. During the 1930s, two-thirds of the Libya population was deported to the east and transferred in refugee camps. Justified by the aim to defend the non-combatant civilian population, this deportation transformed the entire Libya population to a legitimate target as a form to repress popular resistance led by Omar al-Mukhtar. The use of refugee camps by the way, a modern invention, surrounded by barbed wire to control unwanted people perceived dangerous by the government, was first invented in the colony, and only later they come back like boomerang to Europe as extermination camps. The horror of modern refugee camps was invented and tested first in the colony and only later applied to minority communities within Europe itself. Over the last few years, we have seen politicians confessing and asking for pardon for colonial crimes committed by the national government in the past. In reality, for the most part, the reparation that they offer is nothing but the continuation of colonialism by other means. Here, you have Berlusconi's speech in 2009, first delivered in the Libyan parliament and later in the Italian parliament.
Accuso il nostro passato di prevaricazione sul vostro popolo e vi chiedo perdono. E veniamo a Gheddafi. Allora, abbiamo ereditato una Libia che non ci dà nessun lavoro pubblico, che non ci vuole più dare gas e petrolio, che ha una festa il 30 di agosto che si chiama la festa della vendetta. Abbiamo una Libia che ci privilegia in tutti i lavori pubblici, che ci fornisce gas e petrolio per i prossimi 40 anni, che avendo il presidente italiano avuto il coraggio di chiedere perdono a quel popolo per quello che era stato commesso dai nostri predecessori che avevano voluto sottoporre ad essere colonia un paese e un popolo, bene, per quello noi siamo oggi in grado di aver risolto la questione coloniale e non c'è nessun inginocchiamento da parte nostra.
The confessions, once a practice confined to churches, seems to have invaded the entire society. We like to post our stories, to be interviewed, our faces to be photographed, our dreams to be known, our past investigated, and our biography written. Foucault even claims that we live in a confessional society in which there is no need for a priest to confess our sins. With confession, there is an automatic absolution. In occasion of 2014, at the Venice Architectural Biennial, curated by Rem Koolhaas, we produced an art installation by profaning a confessional used in churches by the priest to absolve the sinners, shifting it from being a religious, psychological apparatus for personal redemptions into a political tool to expose the connections between crimes of the past with the criminal practices of the present that still tie Europe and Africa in thousands of webs. In 1940, the Italian fascist regime established the entity of colonization of Sicilian latifundium, following the model of the entity of colonization in Libya and colonial architecture in Eritrea and Ethiopia. These territories were considered by the regime empty and underdeveloped, and therefore in need to be modernized. For this purpose, the entity of colonization inaugurated 8 new rural towns in Sicily, and as many remained unfinished. Today, most of these villages have fallen into ruin. However, what does not seem to be in ruin is the persistence of fascist, colonial, and modernist rhetoric, culture, and politics. With the reemergence of fascist ideology in Europe, it became urgent to ask, what kind of heritage is the fascist, colonial, and modernist heritage? In recent years, the right-wing Sicilian regional government, in an effort to re-legitimize fascist policies, decided to fund the architectural conservation of agricultural towns built by the entity of colonization of Sicilian latifundium, restoring them as they were originally built. Helped by modern architectural history and restoration theories that after the Second World War cynically separated aesthetic values from social, political, and economic ones, the buildings have begun to be restored as they were designed exactly as in the 1940s, reinforcing the idea that fascist architecture can exist without perpetuating fascist ideologies. In Borgo Bonsignore, for example, where the first refurbishment of the building began just a few years ago, a new plaque appeared closely to the old one, commemorating the heroic gesture of patriotism, in reality crime against humanity, of General Antonio Bonsignore, who was killed during the invasion and occupation of Ethiopia. These rural towns are all named after war and fascist criminals. In Borgorizza, for example, in the province of Syracuse, was named to commemorate and remember the death of a young fascist militant. Against this nostalgic and neo-fascist approach, in Borgorizza, we collaborated with the local municipality of Carlentini, the local community, and university by establishing the Difficult Heritage Summer School, a space for critical pedagogy and discussions around practices of reappropriation and re-narration. Over the years, we started to discuss with the local municipality how to turn the former entity of colonization of Sicilian latifundium in Borgorizza into an entity of decolonization. This collective process has been open to all of those who felt the urgency to question the broader historical, cultural, and political heritage embedded in colonialism, fascism, and modernism, and therefore begin a common path towards new practices of decolonization and demodernization. Modernist architecture, both in the former colonies and in colonizing countries, have been built as isolated sacred objects to be admired. Therefore, for us, it's not enough just to reuse them in the same way previous regimes have used them, not to simply demolish them. They need to be profaned, to be used against themselves, and open for new common uses different from those which were designed for. Beside the engagement on site in Borgorizza in Sicily, we felt also the necessity to take the conversation in other contexts, to build alliances. The art installation Entity Decolonizazione Borgorizza profanes the entity of colonization of the Sicilian latifundio in Sicily by decomposing and recomposing its facade in several modular seats. These have been reused as a platform for an open discursive space where the public is invited to critically reconsider the social, political and economic effects of fascist, colonial, and modernist heritage, and at the same time, collectively imaging new common uses. The first activation of Decolonisation took place in May 2022 at the Mostra d'Oltremare in Napoli, which first opened in 1940. Conceived as a colossal exhibition to display the territories and people overseas in areas colonized by the fascist regime, it closed only 40 days after its opening, when Italy entered the Second World War. The second activation of the Ente di Decolonizzazione took place at the Hansa Quarter in West Berlin, built in 1957 for the International Building Exhibition Interbau. We were interested here in exploring how modernist architecture, that just a few years before served fascist regime, was now suddenly deployed for representation of a democratic Germany. The next gathering will take place on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of February at La Loge in Brussels. Of course, you are all invited to join. As we usually do in every exhibition, we publish an open call, an invitation letter to people to take part to the activation of the installation through a public discussion that explore in each venue the specific ghost from the past. Each discussion is informed by the interaction with its context and allow this fascist ghost from the Ente of Decolonization to enter in dialogue with other unquestioned legacies. In these assemblies, we aim to connect our struggles and shared questions. In Brussels, they will revolve around decolonization of public spaces. Another form, and these are all open invitations for all of you, also to participate through our collective research through a Decolonizing Architecture Advanced course at the Royal Institute of Art. It is a year-long research-based postmaster course that uses the term of decolonization as a critical position and conceptual frame for an architectural and artistic practice engaged in social and political struggle. The fundamental pedagogical approach of the course is based on the articulation between sites, concept, and people. Each participant is asked to choose a particular site understood both as a site of actions and as a site of knowledge. This year's theme starts from the Arabic term al-masha, that could be roughly translated as rural commons, and it refers to communal land equally distributed among farmers. Al-masha can only exist if people decide to cultivate the land together. The moment they stop the cultivation, they lose its possession. It is possessions through common uses. What appears to be fundamental is that in order for this category to exist, it must be activated common uses. Today, in fact, we may ask, is it possible to reactivate the cultivation of rural common, expanding the meaning of cultivation to other human activities that imply the common taking care of life? In the process of modernization, rural commons have been marginalized since they were considered unproductive, inefficient, and corrupt. Founded on local trust and kindship and friendship, rural commons were threatening the centralized and abstract notion of the nation state. Today, due to the economic, environmental, and humanitarian catastrophe created by modernist fundamentalism of endless exploitation, progress, and salvation, the rural commons have regained interest, challenging the stereotypical image of the rural trapped between conservative politics and tradition. These research programs aim to challenge the classic material and aesthetic framework for understanding colonial architecture, proposing to treat architectural space both as a product of social and political and economic transformation, but also as a privileged side of its analysis, and to expand upon and reconceptualize colonial experience by investigating continuities and discontinuities between past and contemporary form of colonial space. In the processes of colonization and decolonization, architecture plays always a crucial role in organizing spatial relation and expressing ideologies. And even when abandoned or in ruin, it is still mobilized as evidence for political and cultural claims. Through this series of exhibitions, architectural interventions, public gatherings, and pedagogical experiments, we aim to learn from different sites and buildings and ally with people who feel the urgency to question modernist, colonial, and fascist heritage. And I stop here. Thank you. And as I said, maybe this is a little bit almost a mission impossible, but I would love, if there is enough time, to take. It will be possible.
We have time? Okay. So, Alessandro, do you want to sit in one of the chairs? And so maybe, I don't know, if the audience would like to address Alessandro. I think he was provocative enough. So who would like to start? Francisco, you want to give us a hand here?
I don't know if this one is working or not. And as I said, maybe it's very difficult to.
In order for us all to know each other, maybe
Okay. My name is Alvaro. Hi. Thank you very much, Alessandro. It was fantastic. It was definitely very provocative. But I want to double-click, let's say, on your idea. Okay, so it's decolonizing, and in order to do that, it has to do with profanity, you said. So I would like to know a bit more on the profanity side, especially when you're dealing with ruins. Like many times what we have seen is, okay, you're against the original function, let's say, or how it operated originally. But I wonder what happens in the conversations that are there, and how does that become profanity?
Yeah. Thank you for me the time just to clarify. And maybe I would like to make two clarifications. The first is definitely one important thing that I personally, and with many others, we don't want to define decolonizations once for all and apply it universally, as modernity did, because that would be the worst thing that we can do. We have to constantly repeat to ourselves, what does it mean to colonize, to decolonize, sorry, in this case. And that question is to be answered with our body and our location. Cannot be answered theoretically. Can only be answered in an embodied practice and thinking. And that means different things. I briefly also trying to explain how I understood that question differently when I was in Palestine, and how it changed when I moved back to Europe, and what different task implied for me. But this, I think, it's a question each one of you needs to answer personally and take risk, maybe make mistakes, but there is no discipline that saves you, or theoretical book, that will make you feel comfortable on how to approach it. The other ways in which we personally, and again, don't take this as a kind of new trending academic concept to be consumed, because that would be, again, another big failure. I always like to speak from the practice. That is keep changing also, because I change and the context change too. Where for us, decolonization meant an act of profanation. In the ways in which maybe Agamben talked about profanation, is this very important moment in which sacred objects are taken from their aura space and then reused. And actually their common use is reinvented. An example for this, so we can grasp what does it mean in concrete terms. Think about how modernity understands art objects as put it in a pedestal to become sacred. In fact, the essence of profanation is when you touch things, where you invent that use by only touching and investing something with the object, something that modernity and the sacralizations forbid people to do. No, you cannot touch objects. And in fact, I mean, that is, if you think, most of us maybe in this room have been trained in Western education. And of course, we assume that how we experience art, through this location of objects in a white cube is normal. But we know that through history, arts were actually very much used. Was not just deprived from its context, was not deprived from people for touching it. So in that sense, for me, there are many things that can happen in parallel in different, if you like, words. In art, how we challenge this modernist understanding of art that locates objects that becomes untouchable. And in fact, when we see an object going inside a museum, means that that object, it doesn't, it ends its life. It's not used anymore by people, so it's dead. But in architecture also, the concept of decolonization as an act of profanation for us, again, don't take this as a kind of receipt to be used everywhere, but for us, how we understand it, I also will try to make a very simple example, and hopefully I will not banalize it too much. But in one of our projects when we were in Palestine, we started to speculate on the reuse of Israeli settlements, and asking this question, how to reuse them in the moment, they will be evacuated, how to decolonize these colonies that were built by Israel on the top of the hill. And then suddenly there was one military base, Oshu Grab, close to our studio, that was evacuated. It was 2008. And suddenly everyone entered into this military base. And suddenly that place became a place where people that have been imprisoned use architecture to tell the story of torture, for example, that many times we know are extremely difficult to share with family members. But the fact that in that very brief moment in which the Israeli withdraw, people enter inside. And these people start to tell their story to their family. And of course, many other things happened, including, of course, the smashing of the windows, the stealing of iron bar from columns, etc. But this also opened up a moment in which I remember Imad Al-Atrash, which is the director of Palestine Wildlife Association in Bet Sahur, where we live. At some point, Imad saw a watchtower. You imagine, classic military base has this watchtower, and they are on the border of this military base. And he might, suddenly jump on one of this watchtower and put his tripod and start, to look around for bird watching. And he was saying, that now the fact that the military base also has this buffer zone, which is a no man's land, so paradoxically, he started to look at forms of nature and non-human inhabitations that couldn't see actually, the part around Bethlehem. For me, he's jumping on a device that was the watchtower that is used literally as a panopticon instrument to kill people. To use the same device to actually do bird watching, that is for me one of the several forms of profanation. That is the way of how to reinvent in a completely radical different way the use of the watchtower. Because of course, what happened, that meanwhile Himad was on top of this, the Palestinian security say, no, we have to evacuate everyone from this military base because we have to use the military base in the same way it was designed. And that is what happened through, unfortunately, many processes of decolonizations, the historical decolonization after the Second World War. And unfortunately, this was also, if you remember, the discussions between Nehru and Gandhi. Nehru was a pragmatic person, wants to build an independent India, and he said, we have hospitals, we have schools, we have military bases, we just have to use them in the same way. And Gandhi said there is no possibility if we are not radically profaning these buildings and changing them in a completely different way, we will be trapped in the same colonial legacies. We just change people, but the building, they will continue to perform in the same way. So this is why between demolitions, reuse, and profanations, we always try to work on the idea of how in architecture also, not only in also different fields, but how architecture can be profane, and what does it mean that you use that in a completely different way, how to reinvent that use. And this can be done, of course, as I said, also collectively. And one of the very challenging things, I have to say, is also how we stabilize that use, because that use, you see it many times during the time of revolution. During the time in which there is a big political change, in which society is reinvented, these are where people somehow, if you hear them, everyone says, I was part of this and I felt more alive. This is a moment in which you feel that you are not just living a normal life. You feel that you are building something. And however, that intensity is very difficult to stabilize. It's very difficult, to constantly ask this fundamental question. So there is a lot of practice and there is a lot of also theory invested, in understanding how the term of decolonization could actually mean different things in different contexts and for different people. But this needs to be both practice and theorize, I believe.
Good evening. Thank you so much for the lecture. Pedro Cerdeira, University of Geneva. I wanted to know more about the way you conceptualize colonization, regarding specifically the Sicilian case, given that it comes after other institutions regarding the Italian colonies. So regarding specifically the Sicilian case, could we say that, or could we also say that the fascist regime colonized the rest of the country, of Italy as well? Or is Sicily that specific regarding the rest of the country? And how do you reconcile the concept of colonization with the colonial presence in Africa, when in Libya and Ethiopia, colonization also meant categorization of population regarding skin color and with consequent juridical statutes. So I was curious to know, how do you articulate the concept of colonization with all those specificities. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I would say that more than us defining, in this case, what constitutes a form of colonizations, we just follow what most of the time, actually, fascist governments, they know how to do very well. They just make more extreme something that it seems was already there, but in a more liberal form, it's a little bit more hidden. No? And in this case, what the fascist regime did, maybe compared to the liberal governments that actually started colonization, because it was not just the fascist government that started to colonize Africa, it was started way before. But as I was saying, what they did that in a more incredibly clear way, it was to establish agency of colonizations. No? So in this case, I would say I'm not an historian, so I won't claim a specificity in relation to that. I just take and I showed one of this atlas that was called Ente di colonizzazione della Libia and Ente di decolonizzazione del latifondo siciliano. And if you open these books, you see a manual of course of how to do that. And for us, I mean, that was just a starting point to take back also this question of colonization within Europe itself, because one of the things I experienced when I moved from Palestine back to one of the periphery of Europe was also to say, first of all, decolonization is something in the past, but also it's something that is out there. And for us, I think it was important to bring these conversations, I think, within Europe itself and open an internal front in which also European bodies can be part of the struggle without saying either, this is their job, or to say, yeah, I'm in solidarity. Solidarity is not enough. We have to be active and we have to take responsibility and risk. And in that case, specifically, for us, also the collapse of this three monster, which is colonization, fascism, and modernity, that in a way at some point, collapse one on each other, it was incredibly somehow revealing also of the problem of how much modernity, with the idea of tabula rasa, with the idea of no history, with the idea that, whatever, if you are not modern, you are traditional. We have to challenge these basic assumptions. We have, our life is way more complicated than just being modern, not modern. And we still today, in the normal sense, we say, this is modern. What does it imply? It's better. It's new. It's more progressive. But of course, as I showed, in the moment in which they were doing this incredibly sophisticated whitewash architecture in Libya, they were building camps. And these two things, they are always together, no? In the time we built also fantastic architecture in the States, we are also continue to build camps. And modernity is deeply invested in those spaces. So for me, that question of what does it mean, first of all, of course, colonization historically, but also more importantly, what does it mean decolonization as a practice of today? It's also understanding, that how these different legacies are still existing today in the way how we think, how we assume that in the form how we think is normal. No, we assume that in the ways in which I study, for example, architecture in the school, on this linear way, no? I mean, there was the Greek, the Romans, Renaissance. What is it? And then we say we are not religious person. You build that kind of, no, I'm not a religious person, but architecture is this, no? It goes from the Greek to the Roman. And many of us, have been educated as architects, this to be the lineage. No? So investing for me today in asking these questions of colonization and decolonization is also disrupting this narrative, no? And trying to reopen up a much more complex way to tell story. And this is why the power of narrating the story is extremely important. And who has the right to narrate the stories is also equally important.
Hi, Alessandro. Thank you for the talk. I'm Guillermo. I wonder if you can unpack a little bit more what you were talking about, if you can develop a little bit more what you understand by modernity. Because it seems to me that what you were talking about understands modernity as a kind of a cross-temporal epistemology that would come always with coloniality, like in the same way as Quijano or Rolando Vázquez understand modernity. But you're also talking about modernity in a very specific historical position, which is the fascist colonization or internal colonization. So I wonder how those two work together or not, and how that inform your practice of decolonization.
Yeah, thank you. And here again, the invitation is that I do hope that tonight, if I maybe try to do something, was just to share this more as a questions and as a work that can only be done together. Because again, I don't want even try to give an answer of what constitutes modernity, what we understand as modernity. But again, I'm trying to do that understanding through embedded in some of the things that we are trying to work on. And I think for me, it goes back to what I was saying a little bit before, how even in the architectural curriculum, modern architecture is still that sort of moment of rupture, in which suddenly there is no history anymore, no? And we are in this incredible crisis that despite we call postmodernism in architecture also in a very floppy theoretical way, it was enough to say, we recuperate history, we do columns, and we get over modernity. It didn't work. We are still there. It's not just a language or a style. Modernity has really brought a new word, and I think architects have to understand that beyond the stylistic elements, that you have postmodernism and you are over with modernity. Similar to what Berlusconi was trying to say. We solved the colonial questions. Now we have gas from Libya, we have this and that. I think architects, are still operating in the modern paradigm, even if you stick columns and try to do a little bit more vernacular architecture. But we are still invested, in the essence of the sort of modernity. So for me, was first of all, questioning that understanding and that assumptions that every time we are called, to make a project, we perpetuate that sort of understanding. And I gave maybe some brief example. We do exhibitions, and why every time, and it was for us, for example, pretty striking where we were inviting in this Berlin Biennial, and that was somehow proposed as a sort of decolonial approach to a biennial, but then, everyone would accept that exhibition is done in a white cube. No, I think I cannot tell you what is modernity, but can we think that we can think about exhibitions that are not in a white cube and presented to make objects that people cannot touch? That is for me as simple sometimes like that. This then imply that for us it becomes so important and so difficult to take some of these modules outside of the white cube and let people sit on it. You cannot believe the oppositions that we had from the museum, because they're art objects. What? You want to take the art objects, and the exhibition was here and was just in the garden there. You cannot take that object there. But this also reveal modernity. Reveal, and that's back to, for us, taking that object outside is a form of profanation. To let people, sit on these objects is an act of profanation. So can we imagine artistic practice also that dare to profane instead of being, perpetuating this idiotic understanding of art as something that it's just about here, it doesn't involve anything else. It's just about how you look. You cannot smell. In fact, the museum, have all this system to protect objects. All senses are not used. And again, this is very new, and this was invented very recently. And I would argue even modern architecture itself, what they did, and by the way, in Italy, for example, all these inventions have been done, were done during the fascist regime. The modern curriculum was done during the fascist regime that still exists today. That what modernity like to do? It like to make category and separate. So now, for example, I'm very happy and proud to teach in an architecture in art school. And every time they ask me, but you don't teach really architecture. I say, no, I'm very conservative. Architecture has been part of the arts for centuries. You are saying that architecture is a separate discipline. And you are saying this, there are some people who are saying this in the last 100 years. It's a very recent thing. I always saw architecture as part of the arts. I cannot separate architecture from the other arts. So for me, that was also in a sort of concrete way in which I see modernity operating in university. You said, how do you understand modernity? I understand modernity when they want me somehow, to teach architecture as fixed system of a discipline. And instead, I think it's much more interesting when it's actually together with other sisters, in which you have to build every time meaning for it. Building an architecture, you cannot think that there is already meaning in it, that you build this modern building and has already associated meanings. In this case, it's also for me important to think about how to challenge, and again, modernity is all about separation and segregations, and the modernity is a way in which we transgress. Maybe we cannot eliminate these separations. I don't think that's, it's so reachable and possible at the moment, especially on the ones that have been trained into this and lived into that. But at least we can learn how to transgress, how to connect things that modernities like to see separated. Yeah.
I'm Roberto Colea from Alcalá University of Madrid.
Sorry,
I'm here. Okay.
Hey.
I'm sorry because I want to introduce another thing here, different. But when you talk about the ente of colonizaciones del latifundio siciliano, that I think is happening at the same time of the ente por la colonizaciones de la Libia. At the same time in Spain, we have the Instituto Nacional de Colonización. I think I have the same idea. I have two ideas or questions. No? One, I think, with my colleague, that is, I don't know we can use the same word, colonization, in both cases. And I remember that in Spain, during the 16th century, Catholic king used the same, it happened the same. They used the word colonization for two completely different situations. One, the conquest of America, and the other one for the colonization, that's what they call the empty territory after the Reconquista from the Islam war. I don't know if we can compare these two situations in a Congress where we are talking about colonization and war. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I would like to try to answer by also talking about how we are very precise on the language that we use, and how defining words is actually very important, not only theoretical but practical work to do. I also want to be very careful on not simply trapping ourselves into, again, trying to define the ultimate definition that is applicable, or also sometimes, rightly make differences. Of course, one difference that I didn't make, when I also trying to put together the present colonization of Palestine with the historical internal colonization of Italy, the huge difference, is the ethnic cleansing, is the dehumanization that happened in Palestine that not necessarily, for example, happened in the case of internal colonization. So I can talk, and I can maybe try really to build differences through history, through geography. But for me, the more important questions is not only to arrive to the kind of ultimate, let's say, definition of all these differences, but for me is why we are doing this, for what? And my interest is to build political alliances. My interest is to try to put together in a very maybe provocative way these different stories. Is it also to say, that how, in that specific case was for me, now that my body is not anymore in Palestine, what kind of work I can do that actually continue to undermine the very system of oppressions that exists there. And I try to articulate that differences, or sometimes I try to make that analogies, because also I make explicit my political aim, also taking the distance from the idea that you can work on definitions in a scientific way, because we know that is not true. No, we know that. I think this needs to be somehow among academics, agreed on. That for centuries we know, from anthropology to architecture, I don't know, take any discipline, that somehow knowledge was moved and was used in a political form, was not neutral in a sense. So in that sense, also for me, my intent is not to necessarily arrive to only to define, what are the differences in this different context. It's maybe more importantly asking the questions how I can build definitions or analogy of differences for what kind of aims, because we know that all of this understanding change over time. Even the terms that we use today, in some ways, we know that they acquire different meaning, over time. So in that sense, specifically for us, it was important to put together maybe these different forms, but just to say that that question of colonial heritage and decolonization is something that touch us. It's not just happening there. No, it's not something that one is just locating there. And I guess I hope that the work, if one could be interested, and this is what I'm looking for the next couple of days, is actually a multiplication of ways in which this can be done differently. That we don't have to agree necessarily, on a unifying categories, because again, otherwise we are trapped into the same problem. Why? And that is what I say. This is modern epistemologies. We are always back there. If we don't do that, we lose our academic rigor. No, because our academic rigor, and I will say our ethical integrity, is measured in our action in the place where we live. This is where we have to be measured, not in abstract terms, if we are able to apply definitions that are valid everywhere. No, I think we have to be very also rigorous and critical about each other's work, but embedded in the specific situations in some ways. So for me, it's very interesting when you say, that at the same time, maybe, in Spain, there was a similar attempt, but at the same time, completely different, no? And we have always to work between this also differences and analogies that maybe these conditions have. but also with, again, asking ourselves why we're doing this and why we try to do this work together. Is it to dismantle some of these legacies that are still somehow existing? And the fact that today is giving us this incredible opportunity, to try to bring these different situations together, we don't have to see that as a threat, these are always two radical different situations. Of course they are. Sometimes we are so different in one person. There are so many me, myself. If I start to, also break down this, I'm not one person. But of course, in this case, and I really hope that, let's say, in this next couple of days, we are able also to put forward, hypotheses that are also radically different without stopping talking to each other, without necessarily undermine or wanting to say, no, that is actually the right definition. This is why they're different, and then we close the chapter. But it's rather how we can actually work within these different localities and at the same time continue conversations, to be in conversations with others. I mean, that's also something that I personally consider incredibly refreshing when I ask the same questions suddenly into another context and try to answer these questions, these fundamental questions, in fundamental different ways. So in that sense, I'm looking forward to hear how colonization and decolonization have different meaning in Spain at that historical moment, but also today, how they acquire different meaning today. And are these actually the exact words that we have to use? Are these operational for the kind of work that we want to do? I don't know how much time. I don't want to abuse of the time.
Anna, we have another question.
Okay. No, I have what I want to join others by thanking you, Alessandro, for the presentation and then this discussion. My name is David. I'm coming from Ithaca, New York today. And I was, among the many things I was struck by in your presentation, and I'm talking about the visual presentation, were the photos with furniture and food and carpets. And I wonder if furnishings or furniture, how you think of it in your practice and your teaching of architecture, does it have a decolonial potential, or do you think of it in that way?
No, thank you, because this also gives me a possibility also to tell you a little bit more about why I still feel when we do this, thinking architecturally. Because maybe I hope that maybe it was clear enough that for us, when we were invested in asking these difficult questions in the case of this fascist town built in the 40s in Italy and Sicily, also was important for us to think how actually we can even approach this building, how somehow one will not remain overwhelmed by the monumentality and the kind of spatial dimensions. And one of the things that I think we tried to do from the very beginning was also to really work on the domestic side. I think one of the aspect of this fascist architecture was always this presentation of architecture as only in its public dimensions. No, one of my students is a very telling. She also worked on formulating a vocabulary she called facadism in the case of fascism, because for the regime was enough to build building with the facade and to have a sort of set, a little bit like a cinema, no? Inside, and I would say the domestic space, which is very political and very historically somehow also the domain of feminist practices, was of course completely erased. No, there was only the public dimensions, you know, to the point in which you could still see and are still working pretty well in that sense, because they're all this scenography, no? That, of course, many of film directors loved, including Pasolini, Fellini, you know, also Second World War film director, specifically because these were designed to be photographed. You saw the kind of almost scandalous beauty of this architecture in Libya and the building, and I don't know if you noticed, but there were historical materials that were incredibly photographed, and then there were pictures that were taken in 2009 of completely ruined and changed. So for us, in that sense, approaching that was, first of all, we did several operations. One, for the summer school, we made an open call and we asked people in the town to donate furniture for their homes. By doing that, we were hoping that, first of all, to involve them into the summer school, but also to start this process of domestications of this fascist building by bringing, you know, this used furniture that we used in the square. So we try somehow to take the furniture that usually are relegated indoor to take them outside. And that already create a sort of estrangement. But the very nice thing that when we start, you know, our gatherings, people were coming and say, this is the sofa of my grandmother. And that gives somehow the right to sit and to be there. No? I think these very simple also operations really help people feel, you know, welcome, which was exactly the opposite of what fascists would like to do. No? You build this facade just for a military parade in which you should just watch again, you know, or sometimes forced to participate. So the furniture, of course, had this very important aspect in some ways that, of course, also maybe influenced and the more artistic part in which for us was how we take that experience that is so localized, because, you know, it was only happening in that space specifically, but for us, again, it was important to take that discussions in another place. And that idea of using the building as a gathering, it became so literally that we took the facade and we cutted the facade, and we flipped horizontally and transformed the facade in that possibility for people just to use the modules and sit and talk. So that becomes also this, again, possibility for an art installation to be used. So in that sense also allowed us, for example, now in February, where the installation is going, is to encounter a very interesting group. One of them did this incredible, impressive report on decolonization of public spaces in Brussels that I suggest really to take a look. If you go to the website, you have this PDF. They did incredible, important work. And these are moments for us also to, again, being Brussels, understanding the specific struggles and how decolonizations is practices, how these different groups, that's from academics to activists to people working in the municipality, are bringing these questions with a lot of conflict, you know, with a lot of difficulties, but somehow there is also, it's also an interesting moment in which this is happening more and more. So the furniture in this case, you know, or the installations become for us, again, a way in which we can host people, you know, we can even have food inside the museum and other things that is forbidden, no? Imagine, you know, for a second, if you just unplug yourself from modernity and said, you know, why there are all these regulations, no? And I think, you know, it's the most, in my university, I always, we always have this problem that they decided at the entrance of the university, there is a white cube gallery. And they are always complaining about, we don't have social spaces, you know, we don't have place where we can meet. I said, what do you expect if you put a white cube situations, you know, at the entrance of your university? No, if you want to kill any idea of social engagement, the white cube is the most effective thing, no? Because it's separate people in which you cannot talk, you have to whisper, you cannot eat, you cannot do so many different things. So in that sense, we hope that the furniture is this place in which people are welcomed. There is food, there is tea, people can sit down. Something that we learned from that Europeans were doing, are still doing it. In many other societies are still doing it. But suddenly, we have been completely stripped from this very simple ways of also engaging conversations with people.
Alexandra, we have just one last question.
Yes, one last.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Sofia Lomari, and I'm from the National Institute of Spatial Planning in Morocco. So, building up on engagement, and I'm addressing the educator in you tonight, I was wondering, how is it possible to translate decolonization and demodernization as well into curricula or into engaging students in classes and courses? Because, as you said, if solidarity is not enough, then actions as educators here tonight, like what are the things based on your experience that could facilitate that? Thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Last question. Because as I said, I very recently, I also now formally teaching, because I also have been doing a lot of teaching in refugee camps, in non-formal settings. That is very difficult in one way, but also it simplifies things in other ways. So to answer, and again, I'm saying this not because I want to be egocentric, but just to understand that I'm speaking from my experience of having, trying to articulate your questions in non-formal situations and trying to articulate that questions in formal educational settings. To go straight to your point, I don't think it's possible to decolonize the curriculum, because the problem is the curriculum. Because what will happen is that suddenly you have a curriculum with a little bit more female, with a little bit more non-Western thinkers. You just add a little bit of this, but the fundamental violence of the curriculum will stay. And this is my architectural thinking. I made this example before. If you don't profane, means that if you don't change radically the ways it functions, you accept that education needs curriculum. I think, in my personal view, we have a problem. Because the curriculum, in a way, has, by definition, is to preset what constitutes knowledge and needs to preset what you are going to learn. And I said very explicitly to my faculties, I refuse to do that, because if I already know, what the students will learn, I will not, there is no learning. There is no learning. There is passage of information. That's not learning. So you are somehow killing from the very beginning, because you want to know already what the person should learn, the very idea of nurturing a learning environment. So the idea of decolonizing the curriculum is just impossible. Because I think an approach to the curriculum is to think about a process of learning cannot be predefined. Cannot be written, in a form in which from the very beginning what are called the learning outcomes. In all what I do, if I know the learning outcomes, I don't want to teach in that place, and I don't want to be a student, because there is no transformations. Learning is transformation. If it is transformation, you don't know. Transforming into what? You cannot say it from the beginning. If you say it from the beginning, you're just fooling yourself, and you are just transferring information. So we call it that. There are a pack informations that someone can learn. I don't know. I don't want to use learn, because it is still learning as you just know somehow, and that is the packed informations. So this is why also we have to be very careful, and this maybe Walter Mignolo is always reminding us that it's not enough. In these cases, we have to change the term of the conversations. We don't have to accept how they want to talk. The institutions, to save themselves, they said, okay, let's decolonize the curriculum to keep things as they are. And we have to be courageous enough to say, no, if you want serious transformations, we have to think about learning environments that are not based on curriculums. They are not based on these assumptions, that you have all this pre-packed understanding of your learning trajectory, which is transformative, which is made of research, which is made of emotions. I mean, all the things that, again, cannot be fit into that. So in that specific case, I would, and these are also the very difficult, I think, practice of decolonizations that unfortunately we always have, to undermine even the beginning of that conversations and questioning not only, how we make a better curriculum, but how do we really need to have actually curriculum in that way? And what other forms, we can have that can guide us in meaningful learning?
Okay, Alessandro, thank you very much. Well, we have almost at the same time as a conference and as a question and answering. So it was, I think it was very full of life, and as I said, it was provocative, but it's in a good sense, of course. So thank you very much for being here once more. Thank you, Alessandro, for sharing your research with us and all your experience. It was what I expected to be, starting something like this, trying to sleep over all these arguments that you put in our head now. So tomorrow we'll start it at 9 o'clock with Samia. She will be online from Cornwall, so it's very nice for us. She's making a huge effort because she was, unfortunately she couldn't come. But anyway, she will be here with us in the morning, and also in her section, in her panel, she will be also leading the panel, which is the same days, right? In the afternoon. Okay, so please, for one who wants to attend the keynote speaker, will be here. We'll start at 9 o'clock. Please be on time. And then, we'll have all the day long. And in the end, we are going to visit the military historical archive, which will be, I think, an experience for all of us, especially for the ones who are interested in research on war. It will be a very interesting, very different from the people who were here. The last conference will be a very different experience, I'm sure. We'll have a kind of a round table. So the military are very formal. But we have to accept everybody. So we will be formal as they are, or even more than they are. So for the ones who really would like to come to archive, we'll have a bus here. After all the panels ending, we'll have a bus to take us there. It's in the center of the city, in a beautiful place in Alfama. So even for that will be very nice. And they will receive us with Porto de Honra, which I cannot translate into a cocktail, something like that. Okay, so see you tomorrow. Thank you once more, and have a nice, sleep well for tomorrow, and have a nice night, and have a nice dinner also. Thank you.